So hi, I'm Fredrik Holm, consultant and web developer from Stockholm, Sweden. And I've been working with application development for more than 20 years now, since '96, mainly for the web and mostly as a freelancer. And in the last few years, most of my coding has been about own product development, startup stuff, and I've shifted the consulting to be more about architecture, processes, and strategy stuff for bigger clients, which has been both a great learning experience and a challenge, especially when it comes to being agile and implementing an agile way of working and stuff like that. Anyway, back in 2007, I did some advertising to get new clients. And every now and then I got contacted by someone with this new game-changing idea, which after the usual initial secrecy and NDA signing, almost always turned out to be this kind of Twitter or Facebook ripoff, you know. And the funny thing was that none of these people could really understand why I turned their $1 million ideas down. I mean, I wouldn't invest 2 years of their life for free for stock options in Facebook for dogs, right? And of course, this wasn't just a Swedish thing. This Californian guy, Derek Sivers, wrote a great blog post about it called Ideas Are Just a Multiplier of Execution. And he meant that ideas in themselves are totally useless unless acted upon. They just carry a multiplier. And instead of monetary value comes from execution, which means that a great idea with bad execution is not so valuable, like don't quit your day job, while a so-so idea with great execution might as well be a sustainable business, right? And probably he wasn't the first one coming to this conclusion, just as I'm probably not the first one to steal this idea and apply it to another concept. Namely the importance of the technology stack for the overall success of the project. I mean, just as many wannabe entrepreneurs tend to overestimate the value of their ideas, I think we as developers have a tendency to overestimate the importance of the tech stack for the project outcome. For instance, every time I mention that I'm building a SaaS product to another developer, among the first questions I get are usually the one about what stack I'm using, right? And some people even get so hung up on the tech discussion that they don't even ask about the actual service. Not to mention greenfield projects at bigger companies. Most of the speculation here tend to be about what the most suitable stack would be. You know, talking about run the coffee machine and stuff. And just by coincidence, many of those best stack suggestions often include at least one brand new framework or technology, which of course has nothing to do with C-driven development, right? However, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that the stack doesn't matter. Picking the best suited stack is so paramount important, right? I just think that we as developers tend to mix up the best suited with just the best. I mean, let's say you want to build a backyard deck for your house, right? Which means you're gonna do a lot of soil. And pick the wrong type of these saws and the timeline or the body gets affected, right? And in my opinion, discussion about this is really about kind of tool to pick. Because in most cases, we make the same assumptions about the capabilities we need as everybody else. And we arrive at the same conclusions as everybody else. Now in this case, the circular saw is clear the winner, so case closed, we get one of those and we start building our app, right? What do we developers do instead? Well, we start a discussion about what circular saw brand is the best one, right? You and Angler and, you know. I mean, at this point, we should shift our focus beyond the capabilities of the technology itself and think of the bigger picture. And going back to development, how easy can we find new developers with the necessary competencies in our area? how mature is the stack? How active is the community around it? And how does it fit into the corporate landscape, so to speak? And for me, in the case of my SaaS, the best stack was AngularJS with a .NET backend. It had all the capabilities I needed, and it was the stack I was the most proficient with at the time, in 2014. And basically it allowed me to start building and delivering right away, allowing me to focus on bigger things like marketing and sales. I mean, what does it matter if I use Angular or React, or Vue, or even Elm if I don't get any users, right? The stack is just a door opener. It's the execution that matters. And I think the same applies to larger scale projects. As long as the stack delivers the capabilities we need, it's all about our team's ability to execute. So how do we define execution then? Well, in software development, I think execution is about staying on top of all the bits and pieces of our application, which include everything from how we handle requirements to every line of code we write, to how we build and deploy, right? And to do this well over a sustained period of time, we as a team need to have certain abilities. We need to be able to produce and maintain and communicate well with stakeholders and peers. We need to be able to respond and adapt to changes of requirements and environmental, like new members on the team or changes in the workplace. And these abilities are the sum of each team member's knowledge, skills, capacity, attitudes, and behaviors, all of which are absolutely necessary to have on the team, right? But these abilities don't give us any momentum or execution on their own. To get this great execution, we also need a set of drivers. We need leadership to go in the right direction. We need quality folks to retain customers. And we need continuous evaluation of our performance to make sure we improve, right? Sounds familiar? Well, let's use an agile process then. Like Scrum, for instance, which by this reasoning will give us great execution, right? But then, if agile is the recipe for long-term success, why do so many agile teams, great ideas, competent management, smart developers, and the best suited staff end up in the ditch? Why do so many projects struggle with things like technical debt, unclear requirements, low quality, and we versus they mentality, and sometimes even like a general sense of resentment? I mean, apparently agile isn't the silver bullet many people would like it to be, or is it just an implementation problem? I mean, after all, a common answer to people saying that agile doesn't work is that they aren't doing it right, or they haven't been doing it long enough. And I mean, it's so easy to second guess others and find scapegoats. The management doesn't listen, they prioritize the wrong things. The sales team makes too lofty promises. All these meetings just get in the way. We should do Kanban instead of Scrum. What about, why can't the developers keep their estimates? They promised me. And all this refactoring business. Just get it right the first time.
Excuse me?
Yeah?
Can you speak louder or
yeah,
put
sure,
the mic closer to mouth? Thank you.
Sorry.
I think it's
Better now?
better. Yeah.
Thanks. Well, to me, most of these problems are about communication and expectation management, not about development or process implementation. The root problem, in my opinion, is that software development is inherently hard to do. Consider the so-called iron triangle of project management. We have to balance schedule, budget, and scope. Whereas the more honest version puts it, you can build it fast, cheap, or good. Pick two. So we constantly have to make all these trade-offs. And on top of that, there's often other constraints, like corporate policies for technology and infrastructure. get this lockdown laptop you can't install anything on. Not to mention politics. And here's the problem I have with like business agile. It implicitly promises us to take us right into the center of that triangle, simply by like allowing us to constantly readjust the balance of these three constraints. I mean, the ability to reconsider earlier decisions doesn't necessarily make your new decisions any better, right? You just can't outsmart these trade-offs with a fancy process. The tough decisions remains. It's still short-term versus long-term, features versus refactoring, and revenue versus cost. So what should we do? Should we like ditch Agile altogether once and for all? No, but I think we need to change the way we look upon Agile into something more pragmatic. Instead of loose practices, less process and more agility. Just as the tech stack, Agile is the door opener. It's still people and their abilities combined with inspiring leadership that give us great execution. And in my opinion, I think the difference between teams that are successful and teams who are not basically depends upon one single thing, that's trust. Those who fail trust in the process, and those who succeed trust in their people. I mean, let's take a look at the typical textbook Scrum setup. We have the business or the stakeholders on top. We have a product owner representing the business, and we have a self-organizing team. And usually there is a tech lead responsible for like code quality and development practices and stuff, and a Scrum Master responsible for coordination and governance of the Agile process, right? I deliberately put those two below the team to emphasize that they are self-organizing. Let's also add a red line to indicate that stakeholder requirements should go through the product owner. Now this setup makes like a lot of assumptions. It takes for granted that there's good communication going on between the different groups and roles. That everyone is motivated and that there's a common goal and clear mission. And that everyone follows the agreed upon rules, which in my experience is rarely the case. I mean, in reality, there are always these little disagreements about the chosen solution, process, or even about the people on the team. And these disagreements might be manageable when the situation is calm. But guess what happens when the pressure rises, right? And even if everybody were on the same page, there are a number of issues that can disturb the peace. For instance, we have micromanagement. We have stakeholder side gigs, discontinuity, indifference, obstruction and passive aggressiveness in the team. Not to mention indeterminate management. And let's take a look at micromanagement here. Just claiming to be agile doesn't really mean that old management structures go away. In traditional management, the manager's job is to run a machine, for instance, a development team. And in this worldview, we people on the team are essentially like interchangeable machine parts or resources, right? And the presumption is that the machine is more important and more powerful than anyone who helps to run it. It's just that people in general, and especially smart people, don't really like to be treated as expendable resources, right? What I see a lot is that the management doesn't trust the team enough to allow them to be fully self-organized. As a result of this, it's not unusual that the product owner or the Scrum Master becomes an informal or even formal manager for the team. Which of course leads to all sorts of interesting behaviors. Stand-ups, for instance, intended to bring transparency, give developers a chance to discuss yesterday's work, bring up impediments and plan for today, right? You're not intended to be a reporting session. With a micromanaging product owner or Scrum Master, it's usually what happens. Instead of just talking to each other, syncing their work, everyone just reports their progress, product owner. A variation of this is when the Scrum Master keeps like interrogating the developers on status details, decisions made, with the sole intention of closing stories and maximizing the team's velocity. That's an end in itself. Transparency is being misused like this, like a surveillance state. We don't really get the best breeding ground for trust, do we? So for many Scrum teams out there, at least in bigger corporations, the sad reality looks more like this. Product owner, Scrum Master, and Tech Lead being above and not so organized team. So we pretend that Scrum and Agile are about increased collaboration and flexibility, but in reality it often becomes this very fine-grained control mechanism, which is not only bad for morale and motivation, it can affect productivity as well. Since the team is in such a weak position, there's often a lot of reprioritization going on of the daily work, which leads a lot to enforce context switching and multitasking for the developers, right? Who will have this nagging feeling of never getting the time to finish it. And on top of that, we have another form of micromanagement, stakeholder side gigs. You know, when a business manager or a salesperson or someone shortcuts the product owner and goes directly to one of the developers. And this not only leads to scope creep, but it can also cause like a lot of confusion, especially if the request like contradicts the agreed upon sprint goals. And for the developer, it can be super hard to refuse to do the work, especially if you're a freelancer and can't afford to use the contract. And another variant of this is when like an incomplete feature is being forced into production to meet an important deadline or something. And to allow this to happen is not like bad per se for Agile, right? If it's done, it should be like a team decision. And to keep the technical debt under control, we need to make sure that we create new stories for fixing the remaining work and stuff like that, which might not happen when things fly under the radar. Which ties into the next thing, discontinuity. With time-boxed iterations that come with Scrum and Agile, we need to provide additional progress in every sprint, even for larger features that span multiple sprints as epics, right? Now in the best of worlds, this just means that we start with like a walking skeleton and we continue to work in the following sprints, right? But what if the remaining work don't create an additional value right away? Well, then we might as well be required to work on something else instead, right? Which of course makes it a lot harder to like pick up where you left off when you're allowed to continue. This short-sighted behavior slowly but surely adds to the technical debt, and sooner or later you will end up in a situation where you need to focus entirely on refactoring. But since refactoring doesn't like generate any immediate revenue, it's always a tough sale to the management or even the product owner. And depending upon like how technically mature they are or how long-term their goals are, they might as well favor feature development every time, which of course over time leads to like massive technical debt. And the common way to handle this is to use a refactoring sprint. You know, when they like schedule a concentrated refactoring effort during Christmas or summer break or something, which I, by the way, think is just as smart as like brushing your teeth 2 consecutive hours straight twice a year. That's me. And of course, this like limited amount of time won't be nearly enough to fix all the things you would like to fix. Not to mention that you're no longer in the context of the problem, which leads to additional waste of time in the form of ramp-ups. And then you get this like, what do you mean you're not done? We gave you a whole sprint. Common side effect of this that I've seen a lot is that people on the team tend to get sloppy. Nobody obviously like care about your craft anyways, so why bother, right? Others, often the tech lead, try to maintain high standards. And these like contradictions between different factions on the team can quickly escalate, often resulting in like bad throughput of pull requests and features. And since most of the communication tends to be in written form, like Slack and email and pull request comment threads and stuff, we have the usual lost in translation problem as well. And it can get like real ugly and real fast. And I've seen people do complete rewrites of others' code behind their back. So I'll see passive-aggressive handovers to outright flame wars. And needless to say, this can be like a real killer for productivity and the mood in the team, right? And in my opinion, the best way to avoid these behaviors altogether is to establish a strong sense of collective ownership of the code base. How do you do that? Well, a great first step is to introduce. Then we gradually move away from using pull requests as the primary method of enforcing good code quality, and instead rely on the inherent mentoring we get from programming. And in this way, the pull request can be like a final sign-off, just a formal thing, right? And the funny thing is that this way of working often seems to bring like other advantages, such as overall collaboration and quality and people generally liking each other. But not even those teams are immune to the next issue, which is indeterminate management. Now, every project has a more or less clear long-term goal, right? But how tangible that goal is can make all the difference for team's motivation. Go like, not draw 6 red lines, but improving like customer journeys. Might be clear as crystal to the management team, right? But how actionable is that goal to a development team? Vague and intangible goals like this don't like provide any clear direction, at least in the short term. What about the others? They're dependent upon energy and motivation, right? And how good is your capacity when you feel worn out? How good is your attitude when your opinions never get appreciated? And how will that affect your behavior, your sense of quality, and your willingness to do the work? I mean, let's summarize the situation in one of these suboptimal scrum groups. The performance is like constantly monitored. You're only allowed to work on the highest priority tasks. And you'll have to like justify everything you do on a day-by-day basis. And on top of that, you might have micromanagement and bad team spirit. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that you might have a motivation problem, right? And the best way to mitigate this and to keep people from just giving up or quit is to have a strong why, a sense of purpose. There's this story about John F. Kennedy that during one of his visits at the NASA had, well, no. After all, control is not a purpose of its own, right? You just want great execution. You want great execution even more than like we do, right? And old habits die hard, and we as developers, I guess, have to earn the trust to become self-organized. So what do? Well, we teach them. We show them the way, and we do that by being reliable, incredible. We seek to understand the world and their hopes and their fears. We communicate with clarity and honesty, and we have the guts to say no to unclear requirements, to micromanagement. And we continuously demonstrate our competence. We persuade them to like ditch everything that's Waterfall 2.0 about business agile, and show them what we truly are. A team that develops with agility, a team that values individuals and interactions, processes and tools. That's all I have. Thank you.